Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's history lesson. My name is Mr. Dixon. This lesson is brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Saibono Discovery Center. Learners, today we will be dealing with essay writing in history with regards to the BCM, meaning the Black Conscious Movement within South Africa. But before we start with the content, we will just deal a little bit with regards to the examination guidelines. Then thereafter, we will be dealing how you should answer a essay. And today's session, or should we say lesson, it's going to be very interesting because I will actually introduce to you with regards to what is the line of argument for any given essay. But let's quickly go to the examination bullets pertaining to the Black Conscious Movement. What we need to understand, learners, is that paper 1 consists out of 3 source-based questions, meaning question 1, origin of Cold War, question 2 is Angola, question 3 is the civil rights movement. That is the source-based questions for paper 1. Then section B, take note, in question 1 you find section A. Section A, question 1, origin of Cold War, question 2, Angola, question 3, civil rights movement. Then we move into section B, and section B, question 4 is Vietnam, and then question 5 is Congo, and then question 6 is what we would classify as Black Power movement. That is now what we call the questions that we need to know for paper 1. Then we move to paper 2, and this is what we are going to deal with. We have started last week pertaining to paper 2 already. So section A, question 1 is what we call internal resistance. Question 2 is the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Then question 3 is globalization. Then section B is the question that we are going to deal with. Question 4, Black Conscious Movement. Question 5, Road to Democracy. And then we are going to deal with what we would classify as question 6, Gorbachev's reforms, how it influenced the politics in South Africa. So I've given you a brief description pertaining to how the 2 question papers will look like in the June exam, in the preliminary examination, and in the final examination at the end of the year. But let's quickly zoom into section B, question 4, paper 2. Let's look at examination guidelines. On the screen, I have got 5 bullets, and we will be going strategically through those bullets so that you can have a clear understanding what you need to know. The first bullet, the nature and aims of Black consciousness. So we'll be first looking at the nature and the aims, why Black Conscious Movement was established. Then the role of Steve Biko with emphasis on his ideas and writing. So we will zoom in pertaining to who was Steve Biko, the role, and his writings at the same time, with including his ideas pertaining to Black Conscious Movement. Then the third bullet, Black consciousness perceived as development of Black-owned affairs. So we will be dealing with how the government perceived and understood that Black conscious movement is basically Black development, and later how they turned against it. Then bullet number 4, the influence of Black consciousness on the Soweto uprising, how it influenced the Soweto uprising. So take note how Black consciousness influenced the Soweto uprising in 1976. Then the last one, the legacy of Black consciousness on South African politics, how it influenced South African politics. So learners, this is a brief description with regards to examination bullets. Take note, there is more content that we need to cover if we need to understand this particular essay as such. But let's first go into the historical skills, how we should answer a history essay. Now, very pertinent that every essay requires learners to take a stance. That's the first thing that we need to do. We need to take a stance. Now we will, as we go into the historical skills, how to answer a history essay, we'll be talking what is the stance, and how they need to develop a relevant and coherent line of argument. As I've said to you when we started off, today's lesson is quite interesting because we'll be dealing with what is the line of argument. Then the line of argument must be supported with relevant historical evidence that is organized and connected chronologically to the question being posed. So when we talk about a line of argument, we're talking about how you are tackling that particular essay pertaining to the question that's being posed unto you. Now take note, then it says the line of argument must be supported with relevant historical evidence. Now, this historical evidence is it's what you do have, supposed to have in your books, or it's in the textbooks, or it's the notes that the teacher provided you, but there must be a line of argument connected to this particular topic. And take note, it must be connected chronologically to the question being posed. Now take note, when we talk about chronological order, we're talking about A, B, C, D, E. We are not talking about B and then A and then E and then D. That is not chronological order. What is chronological order? A, B, C, D, E. What is chronological order in numbers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't mean 5 must start first and then you go to 1, then you go to 4, and then no. That chronological order means it must follow the sequence of events. Very important that we understand that. So let's go quickly back. Let's rephrase. So a essay require first learners to take a stance. Where do we take our first stance? In the introduction. Then you must develop a relevant and coherent line of argument. Then the line of argument must be supported by relevant historical evidence. Take note, learners, not evidence from the sources, but relevant historical evidence. And it must be organized and connected in a chronological order pertaining to the question that's being posed. Now, let's quickly look at the 3 ways how essay questions will be set up. Now, take note, this is not in any chronological order. This is just posed randomly in order for presentation purposes. The first bullet indicates critically discuss. It means when you take your stance, you must say one can approve or disapprove. Now take note, I said one can approve or we can approve. You cannot say I because you are a historian. And because you are a historian, what does that mean? It means you need to take a neutral stance. So the first question that could be posed is critically discuss. The stance that you should take is approve or disapprove. But take note, the critically discuss in the introduction, it must indicate unto us both sides pertaining to this particular essay. Then bullet number 2. Do you agree with the above statement? So when you take your stance, one can agree, one can disagree. Then the last one, explain to what extent, to a less or to a greater extent. Now learners, take note. You can also say, when it comes to what extent, you can also say to a larger extent when you did not write greater extent. Now take note, you can say to a larger extent when you did not say to a greater extent, but to a less extent, to a greater or larger extent. Now learners, please take note of this. When the question says explain to what extent, you cannot say to a lesser extent, one disagree. Why? Because these questions are 3 different questions. So you cannot mix them up when you are actually taking a stance in the introduction setup as such. So we need to understand now that there should be no mixing, meaning that one agreed to to a greater extent or to a less extent. That it can't be in the same sentence. Why? Because it's different questions that's being posed unto you as the candidate. Now let's quickly go to the introduction. Very important that we understand. The introduction should be made clear, first of all, to the person that's marking your essay. The first thing that we need to do when we respond to an essay question is we need to start our introduction. If there's no introduction, no conclusion, it means that essay is already vague, there's no proper structure in it, and then automatically you look at receiving a mark between 32 and 29 basically. So learners, so it is pertinent that we understand that introduction and conclusion is of uttermost importance. Number 1, what is the direct response to the question? It means now that you need to take your stance. That is the direct response to the question being posed. Number two, reason why you took the stance. Now, it is very important, learners, that we understand after taking your stance, you need to now indicate, always I indicate two reasons why you took the stance. So, where do you find these two reasons? You must go into the content. The minute you go into the content, what happens is that you retrieve two reasons why you took your stance. If it is critically discussed, it means you must take one from the one side, one from the other side, basically. Then if it is do you agree, it means just take two examples pertaining to what you are going to discuss. If it is explained to what extent, you take two examples. Then the last part that's supposed to be in the introduction is the line of argument that is going to be followed in the rest of the essay. What is the essay going to prove? Now later on I'll be showing you an example when they talk about the three things that should be in a introduction. But our next slide will also deal with word pertaining to what should be in the introduction, and it will give you just a small example what you should write. Now, learners, it is pertinent that we understand that when you read the first sentence of any paragraph or the first paragraph of a longer piece of writing and you cannot work out clearly what the original question was, then the introduction has failed in its primary purpose. Then we say you have not properly contextualize that introduction. So what are we saying? There are three things that should be in any introduction in history. What is the direct response to the question, the reason why you took the stance, the line of argument that is going to be followed in the rest of the essay, what the essay is going to prove. So these are the three things that needs to be in an introduction. Now learners, let me just go to our next slide and then we'll re-emphasize what I just said now. Now let's look at the three steps. Remember now, number one, step one, it says stance and refer to the question. So what are they actually saying here? If it is one can agree, now you say one can agree with the above statement that the Black conscious movement conscientized Black people within South Africa. So the question could be phrased like this: how did the Black conscious movement conscientize the people in South Africa? And then the question at the bottom, take note, when they ask critically discuss, when they ask do you agree, they first give you the statement. And when they give you the statement at the bottom, it is basically the question that's being asked. So just to explain the stance and refer back to the question, let me give you an example quickly. You need to understand that when the question is being phrased, how did the Black conscious movement conscientize the Black people in South Africa? Or it could be, did Black consciousness in South Africa conscientize the Black people in South Africa? Do you agree with the above statement? So now the question is, did the Black conscious movement conscientize the Black people in South Africa? Now the question is, do you agree with the above statement? Now you will indicate one can agree with the above statement that the Black conscious movement in South Africa conscientized the Black people. So now we can clearly see you said one can agree. If it says explain to what extent the Black conscious movement in South Africa conscientized the people in South Africa, now you start to a greater or to a less extent. The Black conscious movement in South Africa did conscientize the people in South Africa. When it says critically discussed, now you indicate, you say, one can approve that the Black conscious movement in South Africa did conscientize the Black people in South Africa. So what are you doing now? You are introducing unto us your stand that you are taking, and it's referring back to the question that you are writing. So let's go to the reason now. Why you took that stance pertaining to that particular question that's being posed. So the reason, now, like I indicated, it's two, take note, it's two uh, content indicators that's in the content. When I say content indicators, it means those two reasons, it's where it's in the source. So as I've indicated to you later on, I will give you a clearer example so that you can have a better understanding what the reasons should look like. Then we move to step 3. Step 3 is what we call orientation. You must provide historical evidence which content is to be used. So now you indicate unto us if it says do you agree, now you if it says do you explain, if it says critically discuss, now you indicate in the last part. Now take note, learners, you can clearly see how many sentences do we have already. If you take your stance, it's one sentence. If you retrieve reasons, the two reasons, how many sentences? It's already two sentences. Now we go to the orientation. How many sentences will there be? You will only be sitting with one sentence. Yes. Now you are saying to yourself, okay, so the introduction should be more or less 4 sentences long. Take note, more or less 4 sentences long, basically. So that will not enable you to write a quarter of a page unless your handwriting is a bit big. So when it comes to the orientation, now you will indicate uh, in the next paragraphs, we will be explaining how black consciousness conscientized black people in South Africa, basically. So you take that last sentence to inform us what you are going to write about. Now you can clearly see now what did you do? You created a line of argument already because you took your stance, you retrieve your reasons from the content, your two reasons, and you are explaining unto us. So what did you do? You created what we call a line of argument. Now, learners, before we go into the content, before we go into the body, it's pertinent that we understand after you have written down your introduction, now you need to have what we call background knowledge. So why do we call it background knowledge? Background knowledge is basically the basis that creates the line of argument for you. Let me repeat again. The background paragraphs, yes, 1 or 2 paragraphs, it's fine. It creates the basis for you to maintain your line of argument. By writing the introduction, what did you do already? You created the line of argument. So now by going to the background paragraph, what are you doing? You are creating the basis for your line of argument in the content paragraph. So learners, it is quite clear that we understand that yes, there must be a background paragraph. Why? It creates the basis and the continuation of the line of argument. Now let's quickly look at how the body should look like. So your body must contain all the relevant factual material. Take note, your body must contain all the relevant factual material, and that means the content basically. So what do you do now? You need to now not write from the source. You write from the source, learners, you will not be awarded the mark that you want to have actually. Now take note, writing from the sources will not gain you any marks. Writing from the sources will result into you failing that particular question as such. So you need to provide relevant factual material for your content. So once you have done that, now you should explicitly link that content to the line of argument. It means you must argue that particular paragraph with its content. Only content that's answering the question. Yes, some of the paragraphs will not be answering the question directly, but it's linking the one content to the other content basically. And this is what we call the Peel method. So the line of argument is basically the Peel method. We'll talk about the Peel method now after we are done with this particular slide. So we should understand that our content paragraphs, take note, it is not one content paragraph. Like I've indicated, the background also should not be one, it can be two, but not more than two. So after you have written down your background paragraphs, now you enter into the content, the body basically. So your body should be well structured. Very important that we understand. It's very vital that we understand. Your body should be well structured. It must be in a chronological and coherent manner, and it must display good synthesizes of information. So it means now your information must be in a chronological order. Like I've indicated earlier, what is chronological? It doesn't mean two first. No, it means one first, then two, then three. So what am I talking about here? If the event started in 1981, so what should follow after 1981? 1982, 1983, 1984. And that is what we call chronological order. If it if you start off, you cannot basically start off with the writings of Steve Biko. You must start off where he comes from, period. Not long description, who was his mother, who was his brother. You only indicate where does he come from. He was a student at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And this was his belief system. This was his writings all about. Then moving into that, now you go into the student organization unions. But when we go through the content, you will clearly see what I'm talking about here. Then you must give examples to reinforce the stance that you took. Very important. The body must contain relevant factual material content and should be explicitly linked to the line of argument, the Peel method. So the line of argument is basically our Peel method that we are dealing with. Then the content paragraphs, take note, I'm emphasizing plural. Content paragraph should be well structured in a chronological and coherent manner. It must display good information unto us. Then you must give examples to reinforce the stance that you took. Now let's quickly look at example of a paragraph writing template basically. So when we look at this example quickly, this is a template pertaining the Peel method basically. Let's look at the point. The point is the opening sentence of your paragraph. It must be clear, and it must make a statement basically, or you must present your point in the first sentence. Then the other E, explain. The next sentences in your paragraph should explain the point you have just made. So it means you make your point. After making your point, then you, in the next sentence, you explain the point, why you set out that particular point. Then the next E is evidence. Evidence is basically you must give evidence, examples to substantiate, support the statement you made. Now take note. Point, meaning the opening sentence of your paragraph, it must be made clear what you are trying to inform us. Then you must explain. In the next few sentences, your paragraph should explain the point you have just made. Then the last E, evidence. You must give evidence or examples to substantiate your support of the statement that you have made. Then the L, the link it. At the end of your paragraph, you must link it back to the essay question, or meaning you must forward it to the next paragraph. So what does that mean now? It means now our linking means you link it back to the question or to the introduction that you took that particular stance, and then or you can forward it to the next paragraph that's coming ahead. Now learners, we will be doing that. We will be having a break, but then after the break, when we come back, we will be moving into deeper into the content. So what we should understand is that very pertinent, learners, that when you write down your introduction, every essay must have an introduction, and the introduction must have the three phases that I've mentioned. The first phase is basically what we call the stance. The second part is the reason. Now take note, the reason is two examples from where? From your content basically. Then your orientation, so meaning your introduction will be having those three phases, and the three phases could be 4 sentences basically. And after that, after your introduction, what you do now, you write down 1 or 2 background paragraphs. Take note, I'm emphasizing background paragraphs. Take note, learners, that the content, yes, we will acknowledge it, that it is part and parcel, but it must be proper content. If it is more than 3 paragraphs, then your essay becomes a bit vague after that. So then after your background paragraphs, now you write for us what we call body or content paragraphs, and each of the content paragraphs should have the peel method that you are currently seeing on the screen. So you make your point, you explain the point, you give evidence, and you link it back to the question that is being posed. Now after that, learners, you write now your conclusion. After your, now take note, your content paragraphs could be 9 paragraphs long, sometimes 12, sometimes 14. So it all depends on your handwriting, and it all depends on the knowledge that you have uh, gained in the classroom, or that you have studied basically from. But take note, learners, you need to argue your question when it comes into the content paragraphs. Then the last part is what we call the conclusion of your essay. Now, take note, learners, when we talk about the conclusion of the essay, we're talking about you indicate unto us in conclusion, by ending my essay. Maybe in the introduction you wrote, to a greater extent, the Black conscious movement conscientized Black people in South Africa. So now you are ending off your essay. So what should you do? In concluding my essay, to a great extent, the Black Power movement. Now take note, this is what you wrote when you took your stance. To a great extent. This is how you started that first sentence, basically. But now in the conclusion, you say, in conclusion, to a great extent, the Black Power movement conscientized the Black people in South Africa. Now that is your first sentence when you conclude. Then the same reason that you retrieve, take note, the same reason that you retrieve from the content that you have placed in the introduction, those two same reasons, you rewrite them in the conclusion. Then you write a last sentence indicating unto us now how you're linking it back to your stance that you took. So what am I saying, learners? That every essay must have one introduction, not more than two background paragraphs. The content, take note, learners, it should be different paragraphs with different points, different peel methods within that particular essay. And as I've indicated, not one or two sentences, paragraphs, but take note, in the paragraph, it can't be one or two sentences, because why? The peel method is basically 4 indicators that must be there. So with that said, learners, we need to understand, after your content, then you actually go into the last phase. And what is the last phase? The last phase is what we call conclusion, basically. So the conclusion, basically, you indicate unto us that you are ending, but you retrieve the two reasons that you started your introduction with. By doing that, learners, what are you doing now? Now you write the last sentence, and that last sentence is what we call the line of argument. So learners, we'll go for a break. Once we come back from the break, we will be moving into the content of this particular topic, Black Conscious Movement. Thank you.
I want you to ask yourself these 3 questions. Number 1, what do I want? Do I want to become an A student, or do I want to become an average student? Number 2, I want you to ask yourself, how do you plan on getting there? Are you going to put more extra hours, or are you going to just sleep? Number 3, who will be with you in this journey? Because it is important that we associate ourselves with students who have the same vision as us, who want to become a student, who want to put in the extra work, who want to become better at what they do. Unsuccessful people do not plan. They just let life happen to them. But successful people are planning on how they want their lives to be. And right now, you plan on how you want your results at the end of the year to be like.
Excellent. Excellence is a habit. Excellence is a quality you have, a quality I have. It's a quality we have when we honor what is true to us. Yes, we are gifted differently. uNkulunkulu akasininganga ngokufana. Excellence is striving for your best. Whenever you have a particular project, test, homework, uzibuze, ask yourself, is this my best? Can I put in more effort? Excellence is striving to be in the top 1% of the area in which you are gifted. And so I challenge you, in every single thing that you do, in every single area that you're gifted in, whether it's sports, it's academic, ucula, whatever that gift is, strive for excellence.
Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's history lesson. My name is Mr. Dixon. This lesson is brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Sabono Discovery Center. Now, learners, let me just recap what we did in the first session. In the first session, we spoke about the examination bullets. First of all, there are 5, but we'll go over it again. But then we spoke about the structure pertaining to essay writing. We indicated there must be an introduction. The introduction has got 3 phases. Stance, your first sentence, you need to retrieve 2 reasons, and you need to have an orientation sentence. Then thereafter, you must basically have what we call background 1 or 2 background paragraphs. Then you must have your content paragraphs, which is not 1 or 2 or 3, but it can be 13, 14 also. It can be 9, it can be 10 also. So it differs from person to person, how you have studied, how you can remember the facts, basically. We spoke about in the content, we spoke about that every content paragraph should have the PU method within them, meaning point, explain, evidence, and link it back, basically. And that is basically how your content should look like. Then we spoke about the introduction paragraph. Take note, we spoke about the introduction paragraph, 2 or 1 background paragraphs. We spoke about the content paragraphs, and then lastly, we spoke about the conclusion paragraphs. Now, the conclusion paragraph is basically 1 paragraph, and I explained to you how it should look like. So when we go through the content, we will be given examples. We will pose a question to you. Then after the question is being posed, you will give an example of the introduction, the background, and the content paragraphs as such. Then we'll give an example of the conclusion also. But take note, we also indicated that essay questions can be asked in 3 ways. We did not indicate unto you that this is how it will be asked. So we just pose it randomly. The first one was critically discuss. The stance that you should take is one can approve, one can disapprove. Now take note, when it is critically discussed, they normally give you what they call the statement. And when they give you the statement will then be followed by a question being posed. So when the statement is being followed by a question being posed, it's imperative that we understand that now creates a critical statement that's being posed unto you. When it is, do you agree? They also give you the statement first, and after giving you the statement, what do they do now? They give you the statement, and they ask, do you agree with the above statement? Substantiate your answer with relevant historical evidence, basically. Then the last one was explain to what extent. So what extent is to a less or to a greater extent. And remember, we said you can replace to a greater extent or to a great extent with a larger extent at the same time. Now we are moving into the content pertaining to the Black Conscious Movement. Now take note, when we started off, it was indicated BCM, meaning Black Conscious Movement. Now let's quickly go again through the examination bullets, because the examination bullets tells us exactly what should be in the content. The first one is the nature and aims of the Black Conscious Movement. So we need to write down the nature and the aims. Why? Basically the reasons why the Black Conscious Movement started and where it comes from, basically, and who was the person that initiated this. It's imperative that we understand that BCM, Black Conscious Movement, was an ideology, an idea that came from Steve Biko and his companions. The second bullet talks about the role of Steve Biko with emphasis on his ideas and writings. Now take note, when we talk about ideas and writings, we are talking about take note what I said earlier, that Black consciousness, it was a movement. It was basically an ideology, basically. So why did he come up with the Black Conscious Movement and his writings? Because he had famous writings, for instance, like the most powerful weapon is the mind of the oppressed person in the hands of the oppressor. Then the third bullet, Black consciousness perceived as Black development, basically own affairs. So we need to understand that black consciousness was perceived as a development of black people in their own affairs, meaning in their own homelands or in their own black reserves, basically. Then the fourth bullet, the influence of black consciousness on the Soweto uprising. Then the last bullet, the legacy of black consciousness on South African politics. Now, these 5 bullets, it is basically what should be in the content. But this is not 5 paragraphs. Take note, and it's not 5 paragraphs. It is different paragraphs. And this is why I said your essay could be 9, it could be 10 to 12 paragraphs, basically. Now let's quickly go into the question that will be posed. The question that will be posed, take note what I've said to you, it is section B, question 4. Now this is how the question could look like in the June examination, or in the SBA that you are writing, or the preliminary examination, or the final examination. Let's read the question quickly. To what extent did Steve Biko and the black consciousness ideology contribute to the 1976 student protest in Soweto? Support your line of argument using relevant evidence. Now, when I look at this question, it talks basically about bullet number 4 of the examination guidelines. So learners, you cannot just write about the June 16. You need to start. Remember what we said. It must be in a chronological order. So you must write first about the nature and the aims of the Black Conscious Movement. Then you need to write, now you move over to the next bullet. The next bullet is basically the ideas and the writings of Steve Biko. Then you move over how it impacted the black people. It means how it developed the black people. So here you will find there are different types of paragraphs. And it's not 1, it's not 2, although it's 1 point, but it's not 1, it's not 2, it is more than that basically. Then you move into how it impacted the Soweto uprising. Then the last one talks about the legacy of Black Conscious Movement. So now we can see now that you need to start in a chronological order by the nature and the aims, and then move strategically into the content. Now we will be moving quickly into the introduction, and after the introduction we will go into the background paragraphs, and then we will go into the content. Now let's look at the introduction pertaining to the question that was asked. Let's read the answer, the introduction. To a greater extent, Steve Biko and the Black Consciousness contributed to the 1976 protest in Soweto. Now, that is what we call the stance. So the stance has been given to you already. You said to a greater extent. Now let's move into the reason. BCM, take note, before you write the abbreviation, you must write out the full word. The BCM and Biko seeks to fill the black community with a newfound pride in themselves, their efforts, their value systems, their culture, their religion, and their outlook to life. Black learners were influenced by CESO educators to stand up for their rights. The black unity instilled in black students resulted in the Soweto protests. Now take note, learners. Here I have retrieved 4 points that's in the content. Now, like I said, 2 is basically what we call the minimum, but you can take, but it must not be too much. Now take note, I have basically written down 3 sentences pertaining to the reason why I'm going to why I took that stance basically. Now let's go to the last one. The last sentence speaks about, it says, in the next paragraphs, I'll be explaining how Steve Biko and the Black Consciousness contribute to the 1976 protest in Soweto. So now we can clearly see this now creates now a line of argument where I need to move on. As I've indicated now, let's go to the background paragraphs. So my first paragraph will look like this. Take note, I did it in bullet form just for the presentation purpose, but it must not be in bullet form like you see on the screen. It must be in a paragraph, and you will notice how the content will be set out to you also. So my background paragraph starts off, very little protests in South Africa in the mid-1960s due to state repression. After Sharpeville 1960, ANC and PAC was banned. Key members of the liberation movement were imprisoned or went into exile. New legislation, now take note, legislation means laws. New legislation increased the apartheid state's power to suppress protests. Examples: detention without trial, house arrest. Increasing militarization of state. A4, arm wing of ANC and PAC curbed by the state. But in late 1960s, emergence of a new form of protest in the form of Black conscious movement. Black consciousness filled vacuum left by ANC and PAC. Now this last point, learners, it is normally now some of the background paragraphs, it start off the Black consciousness was introduced because the ANC and PAC left a vacuum. Yes, it's fine. So that clearly explains to us now why the Black conscious movement was actually started. And we can clearly see here that there's some of his writings also, but take note, the writings is it must not be named as yet. So this was just placed for advertisement purposes, for presentation purposes. But let's quickly read it. It says, Steve Biko, the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. So this is a clear indication what should be in the background paragraph. Now let's continue with the background paragraph. Now this now will be a new paragraph. Why was Black conscious necessary by the late 1960s? So now we are moving basically almost now into the content. When the National Party had come into power in 1948, racism in the form of apartheid was institutionalized with a series of laws such as the Promotion of Bantu Self-Government Act 1959. So the Black conscious movement now was basically in favor what the government was implementing, the Self-Government Act of the Bantustans. Now take note, the Bantustans was Zululand, Ciskei, Transkei, Venda, and those were classified basically as the Bantustans, as the reserves. If you were Zulu, you had to go where? To Zululand. If you were Venda, you had to go to Venda basically. Our next bullet, South Africa's ethnic groups were molded into homelands and given some pseudo, it means fake autonomy, independence, such as Transkei, Ciskei, Venda, Botswana, including varsities, were given by white South African government, meaning in Transkei, Ciskei, Venda, Botswana, and Zululand, each had their own university where they should attend. Bullet number 3. The result was that in the late 1960s, the numbers of young Black people with access to university education grew dramatically. Bullet number 4. Steve Biko believed it was essential to strip away the language of separate development and see apartheid for what it was, a racist policy which oppressed Black people because of their skin pigmentation. So now we can see, now the next paragraph explains to us apartheid was introduced. And when apartheid was introduced, what was also introduced? The Promotion of Bantu Self-Government Act of 1959. Now take note, the Black conscious movement started in the 1960s. Now what does this give? It gives us background knowledge why Black consciousness had to be introduced. Then it also talks about the universities within each Bantustan, with each reserve basically. Yes. In Zululand, they had University of Zululand, so it means all the Zulus must go to that university. Because why? They understood the language better. In Venda, all the Vendas had to go there because they understood that language much better. Then it is important that we understand that the bullet number 3 is so vital. It says the result was that in the late 1960s, the number of young people with access to universities grew dramatically. So it means now in the 1960s, because of the Black conscious movement, and take note, during that time in the different Black areas, there was mission schools, and the mission schools actually educated so-called black people in a large quantity. And because black people were once educated through the mission system, it forced them to go to university. Now take note, Biko was one of the individuals that went to a university in KwaZulu-Natal. Now that university, Biko was studying to become a medical student. Now the two that I've introduced is what we call background paragraphs. Now let's move into the content now. Now take note, the first bullet of the content that we should know is the nature and the aims of black consciousness. Now let's look at the Peel method now. Because each paragraph, I've divided each paragraph into the Peel method, and that should guide us how we should answer this particular question. Now let's look at the nature and the aims of black consciousness. Let's look at the first paragraph. Our starting point is now our point is the philosophy and aims of the black conscious movement. So now we indicate the black consciousness had a philosophy with aims also. There is a point where we're moving from. So now we need to explain the point that what is the philosophy, what is the aims basically. Let's go into explain. Explain. The black consciousness started as an attitude of mind rather than a political movement. So it means it was an attitude, it was an idea within a mind basically. So that is our explanation with regards to the philosophy and the aim basically. Now let's elaborate, let's give examples. Take note, elaborate means we give examples. It defined black as all those oppressed by what? Apartheid. BC aim to rise black confidence to bring about liberation within black people. Now take note, this should be in a paragraph form. So I'm doing the bullets for presentation purposes. I'm just repeating. I'm doing it in bullet form for presentation purposes. BCM promoted black pride within black identity, culture, and history. BCM also challenged white liberals at the same time. Then the last one, it contributed in promoting black unity. So what did the black consciousness do in this particular paragraph? It contributed to black unity. Take note, the whole emphasis here is that the question that was being posed, take note, how did the black conscious movement contribute to the uprising in Soweto in 1976? So now we have started with the background that gave us the basis. Now when we move into the content, we are talking about the philosophy and the aims of black conscious movement basically. Then let's go to the next paragraph now. The next paragraph, now we need to define black consciousness. And how do we define black consciousness? We explain now. The ideology of black consciousness, which informed Biko and his colleagues' approach, represented a deeper strand of Africanism within African nationalism. So we explain what is the definition of the black consciousness. Take note, black consciousness was an ideology, it was an idea, it was a movement, not an organization. Now let's quickly go into some explanations. Biko believed that the black people had been living in psychological chains, believing themselves to be inferior to the white people. What are we doing? We give an example why they came up with this idea basically. Hence, Biko advocated for a psychological meaning, mental emancipation, freeing oneself from mental enslavement of black people. So what was he doing? Biko was trying to emancipate, and this is the key. What emancipate means to set the minds of black people free, that they must be dependent from white people. Now let's look how he linked it back now. This also meant that black people had to liberate themselves. Black people had to redefine their values, their self-image, and their entire outlook, saying the following: black like me, black is beautiful, proudly black and beautiful. So now we can clearly see, now we've introduced even his writings pertaining what the definition of black consciousness actually defines unto us. So now we can clearly see we have already 2 paragraphs into the content. Now let's move to our next paragraph. Let's look at the point here is the black conscious movement had certain developments within the black conscious movement. Now let's go to the explain part. Steve Biko once said, "Black men, you are on your own." So now we are talking about the ideas and ideologies, how it was developed. It is also true that Americans contributed to the style of black conscious movement. Basically, let's look at how they given examples pertaining to the explanation. The very term black came from the United States. Black Americans offered the idea of non-white unity amongst their oppressors. However, the phrase non-white defined blacks in a negative form and was thus rejected by Biko, preferring to be called black Africans, basically. So Biko said the word black must be put one side, but the word Africans, black Africans, must be used as such also. Now take note. Now let's look at the linkage part there. Biko and his young comrades promoted a philosophy of black consciousness which urged black people to free themselves from the chains of oppression and for all black people, including Africans, coloreds, and Indians, to work towards their own liberation. Yes, coloreds and Indians were also classified as black people. They were not white. So it's either you find white, it's either you find black within itself. Then let's move over to the next paragraph. This now talks about Biko's words, Biko's writings. Yes, we did mention it first, but it was a combination between the development and the aims of that particular. Now we're moving into paragraph number 4, basically. So now we will start our paragraph. Steve Biko had certain ideas and certain writings. So now we explain it now. We explain it, and then the explanation is as follows. It seeks to infuse, now we have put in bracket it so that you can understand what is it. The Black Conscious Movement, the BCM, seeks to fill the black community with a newfound pride in themselves, their efforts, their value systems, their culture, which is their heritage, their religion, and their outlook to life. Now let's elaborate a bit further here. Elaborate means we are giving examples. Blacks no longer seek to reform the system because so doing implies acceptance of the majority points around which the system revolves. Blacks are out to completely transform the system and to make of it what they wish. Liberation, therefore, is of paramount, it means it's vital, important in the concept of black consciousness, for we cannot be conscious of ourselves and yet remain in bondage, slavery. So what is now, we are just emphasizing the writings. We are giving examples of the writings of Steve Biko. Yes, you could put in the most potent weapon is the mind of the oppressor in the hands of the oppressed. Take note, the mind of the oppressed in the hand of the oppressor. We want to obtain the envisioned self, which is a free self. This is the words from Steve Biko. Black consciousness is an attitude of mind and a way of life. The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. So now we took 3 examples of his ideas and his writing, and this now leads us to the linkage part. Let's go to the linkage part. Such a major undertaking can only be realized in an atmosphere where people are convinced of the truth inherent, inborn in their stand. So now we can clearly see the point was made where we said Steve Biko has certain ideas and certain phrases that he used, and we explained it to you. After the explanation, we introduced 3 examples, or you can use 2 examples, and then we linked it now back basically to the next paragraph that we need to actually write now. When we go to the next paragraph, we are basically looking at the establishment of South African student organization led by Steve Biko. So now we introduced, there was an organization led by Steve Biko. So now we explain in 1971, CESO's policy manifesto stated Black consciousness is an attitude of mind, a way of life. Now we elaborate on here. The basic tenet of Black consciousness is that the Black man must reject all value systems that seek to make him a foreigner in the country of his birth and reduce his basic dignity. Also, what we can do here is we can also mention that basically all students belong to NUSAS, including Steve Biko. There is an example that we should basically give. And because the white leaders, because NUSAS had only white leadership, they were not conscientized, they were not informed with regards to the hardships that Black students went through when they left the university. Then we move back to the linkage now. The Black man must build up his own value system, see himself as self-defined and not as defined by others. So that now includes now why they started the South African student organization as such also. Then after we have now introduced what we call now the South African Student Organization, we need to understand how the student organization moved after the students graduated. They became now what we call the doctors, the lawyers, the scientists, and they moved now into the community. Now let's look at this point now, basically, student workers committee. So now we say after the students left university, they started what we call student workers committee within the communities. Now we give an example now. Now take note, as I said to you, the bullets is just for presentation purposes, but this needs to be in a particular sentence. Then we move on to the explanation part. CESO established Black People's Convention. You can see I've given the full word and then I abbreviated Black People's Convention, which included South African Student Movement, SESM. So now we mention because we are explaining what was the Student Workers Committee after they left the university. Then let's give an examples. SESM would play an important role in the Soweto uprising. Black allied unions would also play a vital role pertaining to the workers in the factories. Black community projects, that was the Black People's Convention. Economic cooperatives, literacy campaigns, health projects, cultural reforms. So now we're just explaining in this paragraph what was the Student Workers Committee after they left. Now remember now, you don't remain a student forever. If you're studying to become a doctor, you graduate, you go through all the phases, all the years, and you graduate and you become a doctor. Then we need to link it now back now. It indicates to us that CESO established organizations to educate Black people. So now we are linking it back to the question. Remember now, the question is, how did the Black Conscious Movement influence the 1976 uprising in Soweto? So now we are building now. Still, we are creating a line of argument now. Now our next paragraph is, now take note learners, we are past 4 paragraphs already. This is, I think, paragraph number 6 already. Now we indicate now our point that we are making is the National Party government were happy at first when the Black Conscious Movement was started. So now we explain that the government welcomed BCM at first. It saw it as fitting with policy of separate development of 1956. Then, now we elaborate on it now. We give an example. But Biko was highly articulate in this particular support that was growing within the Black communities. He was clear not to go so easy on the government that introduced, listen here, it's good for you to have it basically. Then our next point, government increased its policies of repression, expulsions, arrests, banning, and Biko was placed under house arrest in King Williamstown. Now take note now. What happened is here in this particular paragraph, the government, the National Party was happy because it was in line with the self-development Act of 1959. But later, when they saw the aggression after Steve Biko and them broke away from NUSAS, now they began to realize that this Black Conscious movement, it's an ideology that wants to overthrow apartheid as a system. And the government now implement what we call a policy of repression. And this was by expelling certain members, arresting and banning them and putting them under house arrest. Now we link it back. In 1977, Biko was killed while in prison. Now, because why are we linking this now? Because it's an indication what Biko actually did basically. Now let's quickly go through the changes in South Africa in the early 1970s. Yes, in the early 1970s, CESO was established. CESO came and they introduced what you would basically call community organizations. The Black People's Organization was introduced. SESOM was introduced in the school system. And as SESO was introduced in the school system, take note, also there were worker organizations also introduced in the different factories. Now take note, what was also introduced was self-help programs. Like indicated earlier, the Americans, the Black African Americans, the African Americans played a vital role in the Black Conscious movement, because this is where Steve Biko derived his ideologies and his ideas from. But what happened because of that now, Black people were moving out of the psychological change that was implemented by the apartheid system in the minds of the Black people. And South Africa in the 1970s went through a change. And this is our point where we are moving from. Now, Biko explains, he says, changes in South Africa in the early 70s was a time of rising tension and crucial changes in South Africa. Now he elaborates, it means he gives examples pertaining to the point that he made. Increasing dissatisfaction among township residents, results of urbanization and housing shortages. 1973, the world oil crisis, negative effects on South Africa. 1973, series of strikes in Durban and East Rand in Johannesburg, greater confidence among Black workers. By plus minus 1979, it led to legal recognition of Black workers in South Africa. Then the changes in South Africa was influenced. Now take note, we are still given examples now. So in 1975, independence in Mozambique. Take note, Mozambique was colonized by the Portuguese, and so Angola also. So 1975, Angola received their independence. Mozambique received the independence from the Portuguese, with the respective liberation armies. Frelimo, which is basically in Mozambique, they became the leaders there, and Mozambique was classified basically as a communist. Mozambique was classified as a communist country. MPLA was the leaders in Angola, and they became communist. And because of these two countries, Mozambique and Angola, receiving the independence, it inspired Black people in South Africa to not stop to fight for the liberation. So the next point is victory for liberation movements against Portuguese rule. ANC and PAC could establish bases close to South Africa in those two countries. Hope of liberation for South Africans was reignited as seen as possible once again. How do we link it back? Shortage of skilled labor resulted of Bantu education now. So because what happened now, we link it now back now because of the examples it was provided. So we said there was a shortage of skilled labors amongst Black people. Why? Because of the implementation of Bantu education. Now this leads us now to the Soweto uprising now. Now that is our point. Our point is the causes of the 1976 student protests. Now we need to explain those points. System of Bantu education aimed at to prep Black people to do unskilled labor, meaning darky boys. The examples, how do we elaborate this point now? The word Bantu in the term Bantu education is highly charged politically and has derogatory connotations to it. The Bantu educational system was designed to train and fit Africans for their role in the newly 1948 evolving of apartheid society. Basically, education was viewed as a part of the overall apartheid system, including homelands, the reserves, under restrictions, past laws, and job reservation. Meaning, when you leave your Bantustan, your reserve, you must leave it with a pass book, and that was later named the Dompas. This rule was one of labor worker and servant only, as H.F. Verwoerd, the architect of Bantu Education Act of 1953, conceived it. Now, this is what Verwoerd actually said. There is no place for the African in the European community above the level of certain forms of labor, meaning Daki boys now. It is of no avail for him to receive a training which has as its aim absorption into the European community. It means now there was no place for black people in the European community because they cannot live on the same standards as white people were living. So 1975 government decided to enforce Afrikaans as a language policy within black schools in Soweto. Half of the subjects should be taught in Afrikaans. Now, half of the subjects was maths and the science subjects, basically. The effects of the policy, major difficulties for teachers and students because why? It was not their mother tongue, so it was difficult to read and write it at the same time. There was an objection from the principals, teachers, and even the parents ignored it. Teachers were fired because they didn't comply with it. Principals were also fired. Students began to boycott classes because why? When the principals were fired, the educators were fired, students realized if they don't do anything about it, they will be finding themselves in this dilemma. How do we link it back? Governmental spending on black education was 1/10 of the spending on whites. So it means now it was clearly unfair. So we link it now back basically to the particular point that was made. So the impact of the philosophy of BCM on student movements now. I explain it. The South African student movement, SESM, was established for school students, which you have mentioned earlier. It was inspired by Biko and the philosophy of black consciousness. The examples that must be made, we elaborate now. Spread ideas of black consciousness through meetings, newspapers, growing support among students in Soweto. Government banned newspapers, imprisoned them, banned leaders of SESM and Black Conscious Movement. 1976, SESM supported students boycott. It formed basically, SESM was there, but SESM also formed what we call the SSRC, meaning Soweto Students Representative Councils. How do we link it back? Planned mass demonstration by students for June 16, 1976. The events of June 16, let's go through it quickly, explain. On the morning of June 16, 1976, between 10 to 20,000 black students march in protest against, among other things, use of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction in Soweto. Soweto Students Representatives, the SSRC Action Committee, had support from the wider BCM and teachers in Soweto. Mashinini led students from Morris Isaacson High School to join up with the others who work from Naledi High School. Elaborate example. Tsietsi Mashinini led students from Morrison Isaac High School to join up with the others who worked from Naledi High School. The leader of the action committee asked the crowd not to provoke the police, and the march continued on another route, eventually ending up near Orlando High School, basically. But yes, other people were already at Orlando High School. They went to Soweto, Orlando Stadium, basically. The crowd of between 3 to 10,000 students made their way towards the area of the Orlando High School. This was the crowd that came from Morrison Isaac School now. Students sang and waved placards with slogans such as "Down with Afrikaans," "Viva Azania," and if we must do Afrikaans, Foster must do Zulu also. The students began the march only to find out that police had barricaded the road along the intended route. It is alleged the police set their trained dogs on the protesters who responded by killing them, and at the same time police began shooting directly at the children. Among the first students to be shot at were 13-year-old Zolani Hector Peterson, who was shot at Orlando West High School. Basically, the photographer Sam Nzima took a photo of a dying Zolani Hector Peterson as he was carried away by Mbiza Makubu and accompanied by his sister Antoinette Sitole. The photographer became the symbol. This photograph became the symbol of the Soweto uprising, where Mbizo was carrying Hector Peterson. Basically, the link it back to police attacks on demonstrators continued, and 23 people died on the first day of the Soweto uprising. The events of the June 16 continues. 16 June marches of students carrying placards down with Afrikaans marches gathered at Soweto Stadium. Soweto mode of excitement, expectation, no anger, no confrontation. And that was the modus operandi for this march. They were confronted by police using tear gas bullets at the crowd. Wave of violent protest action continued after the June 16 uprising. Then there was a widespread protest because of what transpired in Soweto. The entire Soweto community got involved in not only Soweto but in different places also, and this led to the formation of the Black Parents Association. Forms of protest continued. There was continuous clashing against police. There was stayaways, meaning people could not go to work. And what did that actually mean? Now, there was an impact not only in Soweto but on the entire South Africa. What did the government do? The government backed down on the language policy, but schooling disrupted until the following year, meaning 1976. There was no school for Black people after the June 76 rising. What happens is that the learners had to repeat 1976 school year. So learners that was in grade 12 had to repeat that same year in 1977. The state reaction: student leaders detained, more than 1,000 killed, thousands were wounded. Increased support for armed struggle, links between student protesters and ANC grew, meaning that young men and young boys left the country and they went into the neighboring countries where they were housing the ANC. Thousands fled and joined the ANC in PAC in exile. Armed struggle increased with new recruits. Impact of the protest continues. Further repression of opposition. 1977, 17 anti-apartheid organizations with links to Black consciousness banned. So SESO, SESM, Black People's Convention, SSRC, the unions also, all of them were banned. 1976, Steve Biko was killed in police custody after he came from Cape Town. They took him to Port Elizabeth. In Port Elizabeth, as he was in custody, he was beaten up. He was removed from Port Elizabeth to Pretoria. On his arrival in Pretoria, he was classified as unconscious, and then later that. But then what happened is the Minister of Police indicated that Steve Biko died because of hunger strike, but because of investigations that was done, it was discovered later that Steve Biko died of brain damage, basically. So what was the negative impacts on South Africa? Internationally, South Africa was criticized, and it intensified. It destroyed attempts by government to end isolation. Business leaders put pressure on government to reform, to change. And that basically ends the content, basically. So now we can see the content is vast. So now we need to end our essay. And learners should round off the argument by reverting to the question being posed. In many cases, this will consist of restating the main aim, line of argument, supported with conclusive evidence. And here's an example how you must conclude your essay. In conclusion to my essay, I indicated to a greater extent how Biko and the Black conscious ideology contributed to the 1976 protests in Soweto. Black learners were involved by SESO educators to stand up for their rights. Now, this example is where, in the introduction, remember, there's 4 examples, but I only took one here. The Black unity instilled in Black students resulted in the Soweto protest. Now, learners, this is a clear example how your introduction, your content should look like, because we have argued the question how the Black Conscious Movement with Steve Biko influenced the 1976 uprising in Soweto. Learners, thank you for watching this lesson and see you next time. Bye.